probably go ahead and get started. And then our one panelist who is running a bit late, Ramon Corley, he will just join when he comes, and we'll kind of give him an imbalanced bombardment of questions when he comes. And we'll start with our other two wonderful panelists who many of you probably know or may know. This is Emilio Pack, and he is the Executive Director of Math and Science College Prep, which is co-located with Los Angeles High School and just finished its first year of co-location. And then we have Linda Del Cueto, who's the administrator of Autonomous Schools in LAUSD, and she has a great macro perspective of all of the different autonomous schools, many being pilot schools that are co-located on campuses, and their protocols and processes for how they're working together. So as the agenda shared, we are going to be trying to focus our lessons learned today in 4 main categories, and then if time permits, we can open it up and tackle other issues, but I know these 4 community engagement, communication protocols, after-school sports and programs, after-school sports and programs, and co-located leaders and top partners is a lot of material to work with to get some good lessons. Apologize, I didn't introduce myself, but for those of you here for the morning session, I did it then, and I'm the same person. I'm Becca Bunn, an education consultant, and really have a high level of interest in this topic we're discussing today. And just one other point about the format of this session. We really want to have a lot of audience participation. So I will start with some pre-planned questions for our 2 panelists, and when our third comes, our third as well. But then we're going to try to save a lot of time, hopefully, 20 to 30 minutes for just audience questions. So please think of things that are on your mind that you'd like to ask these experienced leaders. So with the first one, Emilio.
Yes.
Would love to hear a bit more, and you arrived after the video. Those of you who were here at lunch, you've seen him in the video and know he's a star, and he touched on a little bit about how through the Prop 39 process, you, after filing the application, went and started the relationship building. That's the clip we got from the video, but we'd love to now hear what that looks like in terms of engaging the community once you knew you'd be in LA High School.
Sure. So this most recent Prop 39 co-location at Los Angeles High School, I did have some experience, actually quite a bit. The first school I founded was Alliance College Radio Academy High School number 4, very long name. It's now named Alliance Dr. Olga Mohan High School. Really successful school. Interestingly enough, has always and will continue to be on a Prop 39 location. So the first location that school started was on the campus of Miguel Contreras. And it happened very suddenly, very quickly. Our property was not ready. The superintendent and the executive director of Alliance made a Prop 39 deal to open temporarily at Miguel Contreras. And quite frankly, there were a lot of lessons learned. Because there was no time to relationship build, it was just kind of like, hi, this is the principal, this is the principal, you're going to be together. And that's not quite the way that you want to start off. So having learned from that experience, we started very, very early on. In fact, we were able to, I can't remember how, we found out where we would be co-located before it actually became official through the letter. And immediately I reached out to the principal and said, hey, let's have a meeting off campus. We're going to have to work very closely together. How can we set this up? And it was important to do it off campus, I think. So there's some feeling of neutrality. So we weren't on one campus or another. So we went and had coffee. We ate and just said, and we came to the agreement that in order to sell this to both staffs and the community, and to make this work, for it to be personal and for us to feel fulfilled, what are the win-wins? And let's start with kind of the low-hanging fruit, and let's slowly work our way up into more in-depth conversations about how do we collaborate and share instructional practices. How do we say to the district, here's what we're doing, here's how we're successful. How do we access Measure Q money to actually make this a long-term solution of co-location if there's space there? And once we made that initial agreement of let's focus on the win-wins, then we had a platform that we could take out to the community. We could take it to the teachers, we could take it to the students, take it to the parents. But we had to start with that win-win mentality first. not how much space you're going to give me, and I have to have this, and them saying you're not allowed on campus, our students are going to check out of our school and go to your school, but what are the win-wins? And that was kind of the genesis of how we started that relationship.
Thank you so much. And Linda, I know you have experience of working with a lot of campuses that we're entering co-location, and do you have any sort of lessons or experiences to share about that engagement process?
Yes, so we have several autonomous school models in LA Unified School District, and the model that I've been working closely to support this last year is the pilot school model. We've got 50 pilot schools, 42 of the 50 are on co-located campuses. And so you can see why this is such an interesting and important topic for those of us working with pilots. Got a couple of pilot principals in the audience here. And the pilot is a model that we believe will continue to grow because it offers autonomies to schools and the right to have a thin contract with UTLA. However, much needs to continue to improve in this idea of shared community engagement and all of the components. One of the things that we're finding is that schools who came through Prop 39 and maybe 3, 4, or 5 pilots, meaning district schools, are on all one campus, that's one level of trying to get together and coexist. But sometimes we end up with 2 pilots, 1 traditional, and 1 independent charter. And so now you've got these 3 different entities governed by these different agreements. And I was mentioning to Becca prior to this, I actually think community engagement is something that we need to be better at in terms of the greater community. It seems as if, and my partner's comment on low-hanging fruit, you start on the campus first. You've got to, with getting teachers together and students together and so on. But when you go out and try to do community things, whether it be a campus cleanup day, a family literacy night, those kinds of things that bring people together, sometimes what principals are telling is, Linda, calendar is half the battle. I would have loved to have partnered with the charter school in doing this because it's something that we have common ground on. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we might have a separate curricular program. Literacy is literacy, clean campus is clean campus, college workshops for parents, A to G. There's so much common ground that we have. And so I think it goes back to scheduling those meetings and doing a master calendar. And I think that that's something that we're committed to doing, getting better at. Many of the campuses we're meeting twice a month, and it's just not enough because anybody who remembers back to the comprehensive days when you might have had a large high school and 3 assistant principals and a few coordinators and principal, you staffed every week and spent a lot of time doing some of those basics such as calendar to make the operations work. And so that's really been a lesson learned on that part.
Thank you. And I wanted to just ask a related sort of community engagement question because a lot of what schools tend to do when they engage the community, or part of that is student recruitment. When you're having community meetings and really explaining what your school is all about. Has student recruitment been an issue? This is sort of for both of you, but I'll start with Emilio, since you are serving the same grade levels as LA High School. How do you and your partner school coordinate on that?
It has not been an issue yet, and I think the reason it has not been an issue is that a lot of the families that enrolled in MSCP knew us from our previous school, Dr. Olga Mohan High School. So the community that we grew very attached to and knew about us and wanted to send us their younger siblings was primarily coming more from the downtown area. Dr. Olga Mohan is located directly under the 110 and 10 freeway. So those were our connections with middle schools who knew us as leaders. And what we did very early on is we went online and you can input the addresses of all of your applicants and you can plot it on a map. And we said, here's where our students are coming from, and they're not coming from the local boundary of LA High School. We let them know in the future as families get to know us, it could be that we will be recruiting some of the same kids. But when you look at size and scope, the largest our incoming class can be is 125, because in our charter, we're going to have 500 students. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the incoming class of LA High School is probably close to 500. And many of our students now are coming from other charter schools, not because we don't recruit from both, but parents are making decisions earlier on in their child's career, academic career, of either going charter or not. So we see more families starting with charter in elementary and they want to continue that path. We're seeing less parents at the middle school going from a traditional LAUSD school and saying, all of a sudden saying, okay, we're going to come to charter. So when you really look at the numbers, I think the most kids that transferred in from that would have gone to LA High was probably 10. And I think it's about being transparent with your data, showing them exactly where your students are coming from, and having a plan and addressing it and being proactive. If a student starts off at LA High School and they want to transfer mid-year, how do we handle that? What's the conversations we want to have? How do we transfer records? Vice versa. We've had a couple kids who a charter school wasn't for them. They wanted to go to LA High School, and it goes both ways. The charter just doesn't take students away from the traditional school. Certain students, it's a better fit, and they choose to go to LA High. So I think transparency and really analyzing data to see what is the effect on enrollment when you're recruiting in the same general area.
Thank you. And Linda?
I think that this is a challenging issue because we've had declining enrollment in LA Unified for a number of years now. And I know that charters, depending on their location, their program, the kinds of gains they've made, also have to be very strategic about recruiting. And so I think sometimes there's a lack of trust because we want our programs to be successful. That depends on then having staffing. And so we end up, you hear this term used, sometimes fighting for the same kids. And that is not a healthy environment, we know, and we see it happening even at times within LA Unified schools sharing. Zone of choice is helping that somewhat in LA Unified now because we're becoming better trained at understanding all of the options that are within a certain zone. And LA Unified now has created a vision to include what we call the portfolio model, and that's the belief that every student in LA Unified should have access to choice and to 2 high quality choices, so that within a zone, if you think for example of historic Garfield High School in that zone, there's Garfield High School, and then we have the tourist site that have 5 different pilot programs on it. We also have the Hilda Solis site. And so originally, kids grew up where their parents went to Garfield. There was a sense of tradition. Grandparents went to Garfield. This was very difficult. But as we got together and talked about the positives of the program and did joint recruiting, it made it a little bit easier. One of the reasons I wanted to come today was that I hoped to be able to learn from people here at this conference, because I'd like to see how we could do better recruitment efforts where we bring charter together with district schools. And maybe if it's going out together to the 8th graders, if we're talking about high school, and if somebody has a successful practice on that, I would love to hear it during the question answer part of it, because it's an area we need to work on.
And we have an arrival. Ramon Corley is here with us.
My apologies, everyone. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Thank you for having me. I apologize. We had a flood, but it's okay.
I'm sorry to hear that, but all the more that we appreciate your time and your being here. So thank you so much. And as you mentioned again, he is principal of Crenshaw High School, and interestingly used to work in LUSD's charter office, so kind of has the lens from the charter office, and now working in traditional high school. And we've just been discussing community engagement. We were going to switch gears and go to communication protocols, just in the interest of time. Unless you have something burning you want to share on community engagement.
Communication is great.
What's that?
Communication protocol is a great point for me to jump in.
Okay, awesome. Then here we go. Can you share what specific strategies your school's taken to ensure effective communication?
Well, I think the thing that I would share that has worked for us in my situation is consistency of the time period in which you communicate. And so you can communicate in a variety of different methods, but if there's not consistent communication, there's room for assumptions to be made about why decisions were made, which leads to misunderstandings and things tend to fall apart. And that communication not only has to go between the leadership from both schools, but the leadership also then needs to go back and communicate to the staff, right? Because there could be a decision made that affects the entire staff that was made for a safety reason, but if you don't communicate that to the staff, then the assumption is, oh, you're assisting this school in doing that, or vice versa, or you're not, the school is not supporting the efforts of the charter school to be on the campus. So first and foremost, I think it has to be a sense of regular and consistent communication. And I think there needs to be an agreement. Second thing I would say, there has to be a clear agreement and understanding between the leadership of both schools about how the best way for that communication to go between each school. Because what tends to happen sometimes is if your regular mode of communication is email, but I don't really do email, then I may not be able to respond within the time frame or within the ideal way that you like for the response to happen, or if you rather have a face-to-face. But there has to be clarity around how we want to communicate, how often we're going to communicate, and then we have to hold that time sacred, because if you leave a lot of space between the time that you communicate, again, it goes back to that there's a lot of opportunity for assumptions to be made about why decisions were made, which may not be for the reason that it's assumed that decision has been made.
Can I just a quick follow-up to that for the consistent communication you're referencing? Is that you have standing meetings with your co-located, and is it just the principals at those
So
meetings?
there's so far we've had standing meetings between the principals of each school. We've been in discussions about how we can bring both staffs together. I think it's for us it's a good time now to do so, because there was a little bit of apprehension, as it is in most schools, about whether or not we'll be able to work together. But I think now, following a successful year of both schools working together and having a successful partnership, staff members are more open to seeing what's happening with one school versus another, and not seeing, because we all serve the same community. And so not seeing it as us versus them. And I think that lends itself to helping that is that there are different grade levels for our schools, right? So you have a middle school and a high school, so there's not this sense of competition as much, but more of a sense of all of these kids live in this community, and we all serving the same children. And so how can we work together to ensure that every kid that's on this facility receives what they need while they're on our campus. So we're in talks of moving to the next steps of expanding it from just a leadership team, because I think there's a level of comfortability that's been established after a strong year, but that has not happened for us as of yet, but we're definitely in that direction.
Great, thank you. And Amelia, did you want to share anything about how your communicates?
Well, I agree with everything Ramon said. I think I'll add one thing. I think one interesting way in the way we approach communication was being proactive. So once trust was built among the school leaders, we kind of came up with a game plan and said, look, there are going to be times when we're going to disagree. And sometimes those disagreements will get a little heated because we're both passionate about a certain aspect. So we kind of made an agreement that when that happens and we start arguing, that we would cut that off at a certain level and refocus on what's best for kids. And sure enough, we weren't Pollyanna. We went into this knowing we will have conflicts. This isn't going to be the perfect solution. And when things started elevating, we went back to that original contingency plan. Like, things have kind of crossed the line. Let's go back and let's reframe whatever's happening with what's best for kids. And that was a proactive way to kind of bring the communication level back down and take that personal sense of grudge away and just work more strategically. And I think that was really important. If we hadn't done that, I could see some of those conversations spiraling to somewhere no one wanted to go with.
And that was going to be my question. If you ever did just sort of butt heads and couldn't come to agreement, what is the plan there? Or it's just worked out that you will.
We literally took a step back.
We'll figure it out.
We took a step back and said, what is the best solution for your kids? What's the best solution for my kids? How do we compromise? And that was our default going into it, so it actually worked out very well.
And Linda, from all the campuses you've worked
Adding to both points, which I think really establish the basics about what need to happen, I want to add that the successful models that I've seen always have the shared use agreement. And so you have a shared use agreement at your site that talks about everything from parking to how common space is used, the calendar for the common space, all of those components. And that shared use agreement needs to be modified and updated in the spring of each year. I think what I found, and again, 42 of the 50 schools that are pilots that I work with are on co-located campuses. Those who don't have a shared use agreement, for a variety of reasons, they came in under Prop 39, schools were new, they were busy, they were getting along, everything seemed okay. It's like running an organization without a constitution. You do have to have that to go back to, and we found that it makes a difference to be able to say, remember we agreed this is how it happens in our shared use agreement. If we need to talk about it again, let's take it out, let's make some modifications, and then we can actually update it for the following year. One of the other things that we've found is if, even after butting heads and trying to have the right perspective and getting along in a meeting, it still can't be resolved, we really encourage the principals to then get a couple of other people involved. And so, it's almost like the equivalent of marriage counseling, so to speak. You can't do it all, and if you hold it in, it festers, and as a principal, it can be a very lonely job. And so that being said, in the district schools and in the pilot schools, our principals have directors, and they are the principal's advocate, not just their evaluator, their advocate. And they truly care about the principals, and I know in charter, whether it's a chief academic officer or an executive director, I know there's a different terminology. If you can just get those two people involved to be able to say, this is the ask of the charter school, this is the ask of the district school, can you help us get through this? I recently mediated because we had a school where the directors got involved, and it wasn't that they couldn't get along, they just couldn't come up with the answer, and they kind of needed somebody who was a neutral party. So I offered to facilitate. It took 3 hours. Everybody was extremely congenial, professional, and it really took drawing diagrams and charts to work through some of the issues. It had to do with space. Sometimes it just gets back to that. And we ended up being very successful. And so I think what I'm trying to say is, like in any job, don't be afraid to ask for help once you've tried to work it out among yourselves.
Thank you. One other question I just wanted to check is the standing meetings has been brought up a lot. Are there any protocols besides the standing meetings for communication that you've established at your campuses, whether it's, these type of events or issues warrant email heads ups from my co-located partner, or anything beyond the standing meetings, that sort of any communication norms or guiding principles?
In terms of day-to-day operations, we also include them with our radio system. So they also receive radio, so they're able to hear what's happening, and we're able to come to communicate with them if there are any campus safety issues. We haven't had any serious issues thus far, but that's another form of communication that's more immediate. If there's ever an emergency situation, there's also an opportunity, I think, in terms of looking forward, there's also an opportunity to introduce each other, the staff of each school, doing some sort of parent meeting or some sort of parent, and I think that's an opportunity we need to explore a little bit more, so that if there's always a potential of their issue arising on either campus, and the person that you're looking for on that campus is not available, your parents also need to know that, hey, if there's an emergency, I can go over to, and we've had parents from co-located school come over to our main office and have gotten assistance, and vice versa. That needs to happen, but I think that's an opportunity that we should explore as well, is looking at how can we have an introductory point at one of our parent meetings, so that they know the faces of who's at the traditional public high school to support them, as well as those who may be at the charter school to support them as well.
Well, thank you. And I then get in sort of time, and we are going to have, I'm trying to save as much time as possible for audience questions too, so just wanted to, unless anyone else had something now on communication protocols, to switch gears again and go to after-school programs. Anything, last burning thoughts on communication? You guys ready to go to after-school programming?
I think we're ready for after school.
Good, then, so I know, Emilio, especially in the video that you're going to see shortly, you had shared at lunch with the audience that you share, that's a benefit of being co-located with LA High
Sure.
School, is the after-school sports program.
Yeah.
Can you share with us anything, lessons for any campuses that are exploring whether they would do shared sports, the opportunities, and if there's been any issues at all, challenges or lessons?
The challenges have been very small, and they've been logistical. Because we're on a different bell schedule, and we have academic classes, let's say period 5 and 6, but some of the LA High School athletic teams have a sports PE where they practice. Some of our student athletes who participate in LA High sports may be a little bit late to practices, but that's really been the extent of the challenge. The benefits far outweighed any kind of logistical challenge. The benefits include, you get both kids playing on one team representing one campus. So it doesn't get much better to form cohesiveness and to build relationships among students than to throw them out on a football field or a basketball court and let them play together and let them get to know each other. Selfishly, from a charter standpoint, when you're competing, and charter school recruitment is getting very competitive, and there's a lot of high quality charters, when you can tell potential 9th grade parents, I know we're a small charter school, but your kid's going to have access to tackle football, swimming, water polo, boys and girls soccer, boys basketball, and we have 2 indoor gyms and an indoor pool, and we have all of the space to run track and field. It distinguishes yourself. So it's kind of looking, some people might see it as a challenge to be co-located. We have found that it distinguishes us from other charters, and we have a lot of space. And I came from a charter school that was under a freeway where the parking lot, we threw down like a basketball court that's half of this room, and we lost a lot of students who were student athletes, and they deserve the right to have a full high school experience. And if we can offer them sports, then I think that's only a benefit to the child. Again, reverting back to what's best for kids. So for LA High, it was an advantage because they have had some lower enrollment, and there's been less participation in athletics. This brings in a group of 125 kids who are very excited to be on team sports. And the coaches loved it because here's a bunch of kids that we hope, based on interventions, will remain academically eligible, who want to play sports, and we can do so much good for just kind of sacrificing a couple extra hours a week trying to figure out logistics and changing a couple schedules. So it just so much outweighs it, and it was such a big part of us transitioning easily into the culture that existed on that facility.
Great, thank you. And I'm curious, are the coaches on your team, do they tend to be employees of one school or the other, or
They're
are
all
they
LA High School, or they're either PE teachers or teachers, or they're hired specifically to coach the sport. And they've been great as far as communication, as far as scheduling, as far as letting us know any issues with behavior. I'm very proud of how the coaches and our PE/athletic director have managed to make that, kind of a jewel in this co-location thus far.
And it doesn't sound like then there's issues with the shared positions of coaches and athletic directors, but if there were any feedback you wanted to give, how do you do that shared feedback to shared after school?
Quite frankly, our staff is so small right now that it's a blessing they're not doing a lot of coaching because there's so much else to do on the campus. LA High has hired those coaches because of their expertise. They have the proper credentials. They've been through the first aid trainings. They know CIF regulations. So once we met with them and we felt that this was someone we would entrust our kids with, then I have every confidence that they want what's best for kids. That's why they coach. So if they can coach these LA High kids, why would I not want them coaching our kids?
Sounds cool. And I guess I first was going to just check with Ramon in terms of Crenshaw High School. Obviously, you're co-located with the middle school, so it wouldn't be the overlapping sports. Or I should pause there. Is there anything overlapping in the athletic area?
Well, we of course they don't participate on our athletic teams because of the age, but there is some logistical coordination after school for their after school program, and so what we do is we schedule space and time for space beyond the regular school day to ensure that both schools are able to run the programs that they choose to run after school. For example, they have a strong girls basketball program that does not have an indoor facility, or haven't in the past had an indoor facility, so we were able to work with them to provide space for them following our practices in our smaller gym. So they now practice inside of the gym as opposed to outside on the blacktop. So we've done those types of things with them. In terms of the after school program, we have specific times where we go to certain areas and ensure that the area is available for them for the activity that they participate in. And if it comes to a point where, for example, a space that they may be using exclusively during the day that's not being used exclusively for them after school, we provide an alternative space for them to conduct the after school program during the day. So you know, a lot of that a lot of what has worked for us has had to do with, you know, planning out the logistical pieces, but we don't have the issue. And then the good thing about athletics is it's pretty straightforward, right? You know, CIF rules are CIF rules, right? The requirements for the coaches are the requirements for the coaches. And so whether the coach is going to coach for a charter school and be in CIF LA, you know, the city section, the requirements will be the same. And so that helps, you know, in the case of, you know, that helps, I know, in making you feel secure in, you know, having your child participate. But right now, for us, after school, it's mostly an issue of shared space and how we share the space and make accommodations so both schools can run their programs as they design them.
And then just Linda from all the pilot sharing schools.
So what we found, same thing, that the schools who do the multi-school agreement with CIF to be able to have the athletics do agree that in spite of the logistics and some of the work involved in making it actually be successful, in the long run, it's worth it. It does help market the school because obviously on a co-located site, you tend to have some small schools, and they need that to be able to show that students have the benefit of both worlds, the personalized learning environment as well as the athletics. Also, as we know, in just a comprehensive high school, nothing brings a community together like football, like sports, and so it brings that common ground. And in many cases, you have a 9th grader in the charter school, your other child is an 11th grader, and they're in the district school, and so it's important to be able to have that family intact with something that they rally around. The challenge that I've seen is, I'm thinking of a particular site, and they have 2 charters and 3 district schools. And what it took to be able to break down the contributions to the salary of the athletic director, the nurse, who was paying for the doctor to clear the kids, figuring out the supervision, really took a lot, and hadn't been done properly. And when I got involved with it, realized that it was causing a lot of bad feelings because one of the schools happened to have the majority of the athletes on that particular team. And so the question was, why are we not sharing in this cost? And the second question is, why are we not doing it by student, by participant? We did get the general counsel's office involved, who is our general counsel representative to work with charters, ended up negotiating a very nice agreement. It was worth it. All principals said, and this kind of connects with what I said before, we wish we had asked for help earlier.
And so out of curiosity, was the conclusion then that it's funded per student actually on the team opposed to enrollment on the campus?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Sorry, but it just piqued my interest where it left.
And I'm speaking of this one experience. It had gone from where, and in this case, the charter school had not been putting anything towards nursing, athletic director time, any of that. And so they ended up then contributing 20% splitting it 5 ways. However, everybody's going back to the table again, because in some sports, some schools have more and others they have less. And for this particular group, it's really important that it's done by student participant, because they didn't reach that trust point where they were able to say, you know what, it all kind of works out because I've got another after school program and you're going to be able to have more kids participate in that. I have examples of where that works, but in this case, they're going back to the table to do it by student athlete number.
Thank you for sharing that. And we'll have a chance again for our audience to follow up on all of these topics that have been raised. But I do want to just hit on our last topic before we go to the audience questions, which was actually having your co-located leaders as thought partners. And this concept, Ramon, actually came from a quote of yours in the video that you shared. You really appreciated having on your campus a thought partner. And is there anything you want to elaborate on that and sort of advice to others in that area?
Well, I guess part of what has helped me along that path, and I think it is what you mentioned earlier, is that I have a background from both, right? When I started in traditional public schools, I was an administrator in charge to the charter schools division, and now back in the district as a principal. So I tend to look at the situation from multiple perspectives, and particularly from my experience in the charter schools division, where we would visit sometimes 50 schools a year, right? When we were going out doing an oversight visit, maybe now they're probably doing more than that, but we would visit a lot of schools, and as you went to different schools, you would see a tremendous amount of thought around doing the same thing, right? You would see people, I used to joke with people and say, I could tell you 50 ways to serve lunch, right? Because every school, right, had a different process. They all worked for the school, but so there was a lot of learning in how you could solve the same problem, approaching it in different ways. And so, when I'm speaking with my co-location principal, I view it from the same point. So we're all making a transition to the Common Core. Right? So what are you doing in your transition to the Common Core? Because who knows? Maybe when my school becomes excellent, maybe your kids want to come over, to my school, and it will be a smooth transition in terms of, the academic program, if we're both thinking along the same lines or speaking along the same lines in terms of academic programs. How are you addressing your issues around school-wide positive behavior support? What are you doing with your students in terms of encouraging them to make better decisions as opposed to increasing the numbers of suspensions for the student? And so, so I know, I love this quote that says, every man or woman, for that matter, in some way is my superior, right? So there's something that everyone knows about more than you do, and so you don't get to tap that from the other individual if you don't see them as being someone that can contribute to your thought. And so I just approach it from, I can learn something from everyone that I interact with. And so if I'm making a decision, I may not go along. I may not agree to go along with the recommendation or the thought, but it's just good to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing it this way. Have you had this experience, or how are you thinking? And the same thing happens back and forth, from the principal at the charter school as well. She also shares. So that has created a very productive environment, not for our whole school, for the whole campus. So.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. And the audience has any questions on that topic or the other topics that we've covered? I'm looking at the time, and we have about 20 minutes left, so I did promise wanting to leave you a lot of time for questions, and would love to open it up. It can both be a question for one or all of the panelists, or it could just be a thought you want to share that was prompted by this discussion. Anyone? Bueller? Yes?
So when you were, either one of you were co-located, did you start off with an SUA that was, here's the amount of space we're going to have, or was it, this year we're going to have this amount of space and we're going to grow and we're going to grow and we're going to grow, or was it finite from the beginning? Just curious.
It's 1 year. So
Right, no,
yeah.
I'm-
So what we did is the district gave us a breakdown of the space, and they said you are entitled to 5% of the following: gym, bathrooms, and it had a laundry list. And then we sat down with the principal and said, the approach we took is, here's what we really need. We need the exclusive use of these classrooms. We need the auditorium once in a while in the gym. So then we said, we don't need the counseling office. We don't need the computer lab. And it was purposeful because we wanted to be very empathetic. And in the first year, we didn't want to come in and say, we want everything. Because the reality is we didn't need everything. We needed bathrooms for obvious reasons. We needed the auditorium to hold large meetings. And then there was, we've done alter agreements each year where we tell the district, look, we're going to negotiate on our own. Let us have the ability to do so. And then we just put it into our hands and we negotiate the shared use agreement based on an alter agreement.
So from the outset though, was your room, just your classroom space, in agreement that it was going to grow every year, or no, this is the classroom space we need and that's?
It was the formal conversation, this is the classroom space we need for this year, but we had informal conversations through our monthly meetings of, look, it's very likely that we're not going to find a facility next year. So let's start thinking strategically of where we might go next year. So we started having those conversations informally. But as far as the formal shared use agreement, it was solely for what do we need that year.
And they generally are for only 1 year. But I think the key word there is thinking strategically if they do grow. And so because it's disruptive, I'm assuming thinking about it from a traditional public school perspective, it's very disruptive to your campus to have to ask your teachers to pack their bags and put everything particularly if they've been there for a long time, to put everything they've collected over several years and pick it up and move to the other side of the campus, right? And so when you're going through it for the first time, you also want to think, what can I do on this first move? So if there's some addition, then I don't have to come back and ask someone else to move forward. And so one of the things that we agreed to do is that I agreed to give some additional classroom space, right, above and beyond what they were entitled to, in exchange for them agreeing not to share use of some of the space they were entitled to, like the library or like the boys and girls gym, which could create a lot of conflicts, right, initially, things like that. So we did an initial give and take up front. So now if they grow, they're growing into space that they've already been granted, that we don't have to move anyone. But to tell people, okay, you're moving this year, you can stay there, and the next year, all right, now it gets to it, and I understand you have to manage that conflict, and they grumbling, and I've been here for 30 years, that happens. And so if you can try to minimize it by having the move happen up front, right? Do the whole move or identify a space on your campus that's sort of separate and isolated from the rest of the campus, so they get to feel like they have their own campus environment, and you as well, where there's not much conflict in terms of crossing and we need to use it this time. It helps to do that ahead of time so that you don't have to keep going back to your staff with the same message every May, right? So that helps.
I also have an example of the thinking ahead of time, and sometimes you don't have the data, so you can't think ahead of time. I'm working with a particular school. The board approved them to be a 612, and they are on a high school site. They're a 612, and they will be growing 1 grade every year. And so we already can take a look at the projections, the track record, the history, and so we can already start doing it earlier to say, we know what it's going to be. They're growing. This particular school happens to have now just added an 8th grade. But now we're doing forward thinking because we know that when we add the high school grades, there comes the need for the science labs, the chemistry labs. Biology can be a little bit easier, but chemistry is more difficult. So to already have that conversation, to what Ramon was saying, doing it earlier. And then we have another example where the co-location involves one school is Kia, the other isn't. Kia is going to be ending at the end of the year. And so that school that has Kia is already saying, look, we're going to need the larger size classrooms next year. you've been able to have these classrooms because we haven't needed to go into larger classrooms. It just happens to be a school that has a lot of what I'm going to call non-standard classrooms, and so every school has its own challenges. And just happened to talk with somebody from the non-district team to say, we feel that this is going to be such a sensitive matter that we're already booking time in October. So we can come together, really think it through so that we're not dealing with closure of school year when tempers are, could be high and tensions are there. So I know that sounds basic, but sometimes you get so busy with what you're doing every day, it's easy to say, I made that commitment. Oh yes, I did. It's in July. It's in October. We're going to meet in October and do it to be ready for August.
For sharing that. And do we have other questions from the audience? And whether it's the topics from the agenda for this or any other topics while you have these experienced leaders in front of us. Go ahead.
I've heard a lot about, for example, communicating to avoid the issues, and I've heard just a couple of issues that can arise, but could the panelists speak to more issues? I mean, what am I going to face in September?
Go ahead.
I want to, this is something I think I shared with Becca. It's one of those small issues that, really sometimes we don't think about because we're thinking of the intellectual issues. So we had a school, 2 schools sharing the site. Lucky enough that they actually did have faculty parking, and they had enough faculty parking. They were lucky for that. However, they hadn't come up with a system in identifying the cars, and so very bad blood erupted when one of the schools had a couple of poor people 1 week in a row leave their lights on, and nobody told them. Well, it's because nobody had come up with a system of placards inside of the car so that the campus aide or the teacher walking by could be able to say, it's the red such and such a car, and go over and share that. And so I think it gets back to that common courtesy that you would have in a family or as roommates or as office mates that has to happen. And sometimes it means drilling down to something that small because you're living together for 8 hours a day.
And I would just say, anticipate the inevitable. Right? You think about the things that you'll have to deal with at the beginning of the school year. Pick up and drop off points for kids, right? And so, how are you going to work that out so that both schools' parents can drop off their children in locations that are safe and that don't cause traffic congestions for your neighborhood, because that could be a potential problem. What type of questions or concerns would the parents from your school, and what type of questions or concerns would the parents have from the charter school? And how can you anticipate those, and what will be your response to those? Because although their parents may not be parents of your students, they will look for you if there are issues and they can't find the principal. So how could you get ahead of that and anticipate some of those concerns and be prepared to address those? Are there any particular trainings that that the district requires that you have for your staff that may be important to their particular? I'm thinking about operations, right? Emergency drills, and so if you do that ahead of time, because that could get really chaotic, right? Because they may have in their mind how they want to dismiss their kids and where they want them to stand, but they have to follow the school's plan. And if you don't share that with them up front, it can get dicey, and kids can be all over the place, right, at that point in time. So thinking about things like that, that are going to happen, that are going to take place, and that you can already have a predetermined response for it, because you already have enough issues as a principal to deal with as it is, and if you can alleviate as many of those up front, it will help with a much more smoother school year. So then just think about the issues you have at your school, and they're going to happen at the other school, right? So when they happen at other school, how are you going to address it? Just think about that ahead of time, because it will happen, it will take place, and if you prepare, if you have a predetermined response, it makes it smooth for you. You don't have to take half of your day to address a concern that you already have a response for.
I recommend a master calendar. So that if you're having, for example, a career day and the other school isn't, lots of people are coming on the campus, the other school isn't surprised.
Craig, I'll give you my top 3 of things that I predict you're gonna have to deal with. One of it is gonna be some sort of operational incident where, let's say your air conditioner is gonna go out and you're gonna kind of not be at the mercy, but you can't just go and call an outside contractor. You have to use LAUSD, M&O. And you kind of are at the mercy of the site plant manager to put in that ticket, and then the timeline is whenever it kind of happens. You have very little control over it. So that's one I predict will happen, and it's one of the ones that frustrates me, but it's part of co-location. 2 is you probably have some kind of conflict between students. And that just happens when you get a bunch of kids on the same campus. You're gonna have conflicts between your own students. Good likelihood you're gonna have conflict between students from each school, and you should have a protocol in place on how do you communicate with each parent and make sure that thing doesn't get exaggerated and blown up that, oh my God, these kids are going after each other. And then I think the third one probably has to do with logistics, where LA High or we decided to have an after-school event. We forgot to clear it through the calendar because we have so many things on our mind, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, in the middle of our KC practice test, there's a live band playing outside, and it's like, oh my God, where did this happen? Or we decided to do some kind of parent barbecue, and it just so happens they're doing their pep rally at the same time. And that's just about having that. I know it sounds so easy to say, have consistent meetings and communicate. Life happens. You get busy, and you plan something last minute, and the last thing on your mind is, oh yeah, I gotta let that school know. So I'll talk to you in a year, and you can tell me which of those 3 has happened. But I can almost bet you, I'll bet you $20 you'll have the 3 of them happen in a year.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
It might not be the AC, it might be plumbing.
Right. It could be a flood.
And are there any other questions? If not, I just have a quick follow-up to that one in terms of all these unanticipated events that you'll have to confront. Do you, in your standing meetings with your co-located partners, do you have set agenda items, or do you set them based on what comes up sort of in that in-between time, or do you have standing items you always hit on, safety, something? What does that look like?
We generally have a list of set items that we discuss, but there are always things like this. I just wanted to know if it's okay if I use the multipurpose. I know I didn't tell you before, but we need to have a parent meeting because this issue took place. Before, can I use the multipurpose room for that? And my parents would like to host some, so things. Those are the things that happen. That sometimes things you need to create a meeting or have an event to address that you don't have pre-planned. But we have standard things that we discuss. And for the most part, it's really mostly around safety and logistics and operations and making sure you know who to contact if you have issues. You need to, that tends to be the most, the predominant part of the conversation. Operational things. However, we do make sure to create space for both to share concerns about things that have taken place, and I think that's important. So that it's already predetermined that a portion of this meeting will be allocated for you to share your concerns and also for me to share my concerns. And that way it doesn't come across as one person's complaining, because we already established, right, that we're going to have, you can say, whatever, because and what you tend to find out is there may be issues that are happening at your school that you're not even aware of, right? That you're not aware of because the kids heard it first and they came back around. So I think it's good to create space, have set agenda items, but also create some space for both principals to be able to share whatever their concerns are with the other.
Thank you. Have your plant manager at some of the meetings.
And for plant managers, is for that feedback to the plant manager, how do you handle actually doing that? Is it at your schools?
we have a very strong relationship with our plant manager, so, you know, if it's a concern regarding our allocated space, we have an entire building at LA High School, so it's us and the plant manager. So he's kind of our neighbor, he's in the immediate facility, literally. So no, if there's something wrong with the room, we don't go through LA High School, we go
We
directly
just
to the
have the
plant
direct
manager.
communication
Yeah.
with the plant manager.
Yeah.
Is
And I
that
think
what-
LA High prefers it that way.
Same thing. I do too. Same thing. She has the cell phone number of my plant manager, and whenever she has issues, she can contact the plant manager directly. And if she can't get in touch with the plant manager, she has contact for this assistant principal that's in charge of her, so she can call them and say, having this issue directly. I mean, because as aforementioned, it already takes long enough sometimes to get. You don't want to add in an extra layer of having to wait until someone else calls you back and tells you that, okay, I've made the trouble call. So that helps, you know, having direct contact for both.
Well, thank you three so much, and I want to give a chance for each of you to just say one sort of closing thought to our audience, just a sentence or two, anything for them to walk away with as a parting thought on co-location.
I'd say if you're the school leader, be empathetic to your counterpart. This is a situation that at times might not seem ideal, but I think there's some true hidden gems to improve education on both sides. So have empathy, have common sense, and really form strong relationships. Being a school leader is a lonely job. There's someone in that office right down the hall from the other school who's going through the exact same things you are, so you might as well support each other and make each other's lives much more easy.
I agree. I think well said, and I also think that just as you would when you're working with a staff, if you're not in a co-located site, really show appreciation and gratitude for the small things that happen at the school and the relationships that you build, and as you're working together with all of the various classified people as well to improve student achievement for your students.
I agree. I guess the one thing I would say differently, this is more focused towards what I feel is would help the transition better for district principals. I think any relationship there's going to be challenges, but I think it would significantly help the relationship if the schools that we're bringing on a co-location were given some sort of discretionary funds to support that co-location effort, because there's always a need for additional building and grounds worker support to keep the campus clean, you know, because of the transition. And there's also sometimes a need for additional security. Campus aid or someone to help, particularly if students are going to be sharing space, you know, and if you're a small school and you have limited capacity, you just don't have the staff to stand and ensure that your kids get from one place to another. So if schools that were taking on a co-located charter were given some sort of discretionary funds to support the co-location, right? Not to take and buy a computer lab for the school, but to make the transition easier. I think you'll have a lot more district principals saying, okay, I'm okay, I'll make this work. But what's happening is you have space, the school is coming, move, right? And then you have to tell your staff, pack your stuff and move it, but then they open up the charter, and the charter gets all the new computers that they never got, right? That's how they see it, right? They get all the new benches that they've been asking for years, right? They get, you know, everything new that they requested for years, but they don't understand the particulars, but that's how they view it. And so then at the same time, if you were then able to go back to your staff and say, look, we're getting this school, but we're also getting these resources to support making the transition smoother, I think you'll have a lot more people that will say, okay, I can, you know, I may not want to do, but I can understand and I can deal with this a little better because there's some support to ensure that this is successful. And because otherwise, people tend to look at it as something that's been thrown at them as opposed to, you know, and then the schools are left to foster some sort of collaboration, but you're put in a position where you already have to look at them as an adversary. And I would encourage any traditional school principal to look, as opposed to looking at the new co-location as a threat, look at it as an opportunity to improve your instructional program, and know that you can't compete, right? You can't compete, and tell your staff that that if it's about ensuring that we have a high quality program so students want to stay at our school, then we can do that, right? We have the skills, we have the abilities, we can do just that. And so look at it as an opportunity to rally your troops around, ensuring that you have a high quality program, because you have a tremendous amount of experience and talent right there on the campus, and hopefully that invigorates them to say, hey, we can produce something just as great, the same results, and you can see it benefit both campuses.
Great. Well, thank you for those closing remarks, and thank you for your time.